Senator Jeanne Shaheen, Democrat of New Hampshire, is a trailblazer. She's the first woman in U.S. history to be elected both governor and senator. Did I get that right?
You did, absolutely. Thank you.
She's the top Democrat ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, champion for women in the U.S. around the world. As an entrepreneur, I feel kinship, a former small business owner.
Yes.
Senator Shaheen, thank you in this crazy week for getting over to Axios House. Axios always starts with the news. You just met with the president of Syria. You're very focused on moving the ball forward in Syria. You see a real opportunity there.
I do. We have got an opportunity in Syria that we haven't had in decades. And we have a new central government. It's a government that has a history that's a little concerning to many people. But what we've seen with interim President al-Shara is that he has been moving in a positive direction. He's been addressing a number of the concerns we have about inclusivity, about stability, about trying to resolve issues with Israel, in particular, on the southern border, and with the anti-ISIS coalition. So I am hopeful that we're going to continue to make progress because, as President al-Shara said to us, he said, we could be a model for stability in the Middle East, but we need help. So we're working to repeal the Caesar sanctions that we had on President Assad when he was killing hundreds of thousands of his own people, and allow business investment so that people know there's an opportunity for hope, that they can see a united Syria that allows them to work, to raise their families, and to build a country.
Senator, you also met with the Prime Minister of Qatar after the Israeli missile strikes on Qatar. Qatar's been rallying support in D.C. and in the region. What was their message to you of their expectations from the U.S., the assurances that they want to get? That's a question from my colleague, Dave Lawler, who's Axios, is Global Affairs World Editor. What is Qatar looking for from the U.S.?
Well, Qatar pointed out, we met with the Prime Minister, and he pointed out that Qatar has been a very strong ally of the United States. They host our biggest base in the Middle East. They hosted Hamas at the request of the United States as they were doing negotiations, and the request of Israel, for that matter. And to then be bombed by one of America's closest allies without being notified in advance creates a concern not just for them in the future, but for other of our allies in the region. Do they have that to look forward to? And I think that's a legitimate concern. I share the frustration with the indiscriminate bombing that we're seeing from Israel. I think we would all agree that Israel should be able to defend itself, but the bombing into Qatar, into Syria, into southern Lebanon, I think is not in the long-term best interests of the defense of Israel or those other countries.
And in Ukraine?
Not to mention the war in Gaza.
Right. Well, while we're on that, so last week, the UN Commission looking in to Gaza determined that Israel had committed genocide in the Gaza Strip. How concerned are you about that? Israel said that's a fake report, but how concerned are you about that word from the UN Commission?
What I'm concerned about is the continued conduct of the war in Gaza, and the failure of Israel to understand the concern in the international community about what's happening there. When we see on our news every night children starving in Gaza because humanitarian aid isn't being allowed in, the people of America and the people of the world are concerned. So I think I would hope that while that humanitarian aid has improved somewhat, it's not what it should be. The Palestinians in Gaza are being bombed, and they have no place to go. It's not like they're being allowed to go someplace that's safe. So we haven't seen yet what the plan is for what happens at the end of this war. And I believe we need a two-state solution. I think that's the only thing that is going to long-term prevent this kind of conflict in the future. But we haven't seen what the outlines of that would look like.
And Senator Shaheen, do you agree with that UN Independent Internal Commission of Inquiry that Israel has committed genocide in the Gaza Strip?
As I said, I think the issue is what they're doing. I don't care what you call it. The reality is that Palestinians are being bombed, they're being killed, children are starving, they're on the verge of a famine, and we need to see more done to address that.
And last question on that, Senator, on July 30th, around a vote of U.S. Aid to Israel, you talked about the human anguish that you've seen in Gaza. Should the U.S. suspend aid to Israel?
I would hope that Israel would be responsive to the U.S. concerns about what's happening in Gaza, not only the U.S., but the world concerns. The fact that we're seeing a number of our closest allies recognize a Palestinian state indicates the level of frustration that the world is experiencing because of what the Netanyahu administration is doing in Gaza, what they're doing in the region. And again, not only is that horrible for the Palestinians who have been affected, but it's not in Israel's long-term best interests. We had the world after October 7th, which was a horrendous attack by Hamas, and I don't know anybody outside of Hamas who thinks that Hamas is anything but a terrorist organization. So you had the whole world on Israel's side. And that sentiment, sadly, has evaporated because of the conduct in the war in Gaza.
Senator, one more hotspot, and then we'll pull back the camera. Continued concerning headlines from Ukraine, including now Russian incursions on Estonia. What should the U.S. response be?
I think we need to ramp up the pressure significantly against Vladimir Putin. Putin is going to take every opportunity to gain as much ground as he can in Ukraine. He is going to go, as we've seen, not just in Estonia, but we saw the drones that got dropped into Poland. He's going to continue to push the envelope of the NATO countries. And if we don't take strong action, who knows what the outcome of that could be. We need to provide arms and support to Ukraine. We need to take up the Graham-Blumenthal sanctions bill in Congress that has over 85 senators as co-sponsors. We need to pass that. We need to send a strong message to Vladimir Putin that he is done. He needs to end this conflict. He needs to end it now. And why President Trump has allowed him to embarrass not only the president, but the United States, why he welcomed him with open arms in Alaska and got nothing for it, has allowed him to cross 7 red lines that the president drew and has not taken action, is not a way to end this conflict. Putin is not going to do anything unless he's pressured. He doesn't understand anything but strength, and the United States needs to show that.
And so you don't think there's going to wind up being a secret success or triumph from the Alaska summit?
I do not.
Senator, earlier this month, you gave a milestone speech at the Council on Foreign Relations about the future of U.S. foreign policy. And it was kind of a way forward for Democrats. It's how Democrats should think about a broader vision. And one thing you're very concerned about is the U.S. retreat from foreign policy.
It is. You know, I think there has been bipartisan consensus that the biggest threat to the United States, both economically and militarily, has been China. It's what the Trump administration has said. And yet if we look at all of the policy decisions, or a majority of policy decisions that have been made by the Trump administration since the president came into office, what they have done is strengthened China's position and weakened America's position globally. So here at the UN, for example, the pulling back from international organizations doesn't make America stronger. I mean, we can all agree that there's reform that's needed. We need to think about how to do things more effectively and more efficiently. But for us not to be at the table does not promote America's interests. So it's one of the challenges that I think we're facing. What I talked about in that speech to the Council on Foreign Relations is pretty simple. First of all, that we should explain to the American people why a role internationally for the United States is in America's interest, why it matters. I talked to my constituents in New Hampshire about the fact that having a role internationally is good for them. When we track diseases so they don't come to America's borders and prevent Ebola from coming to the United States, that's in everybody's interest. When we have trade with countries that promotes American products, that's in our interest. And the tariffs, I don't think, fit that bill. I think the tariffs that the president is promoting raise prices on consumers at a time when I'm hearing from a lot of my constituents about how concerned they are about rising prices. So we need to talk about why it matters to Americans that we are active internationally. And then we need to work in a bipartisan way. I still think it's very important for the United States to have a bipartisan view of foreign policy because the administration is going to change in elections. But if we have relationships and bipartisan support in Congress for policy positions, then those can continue. And finally, it is in our interest to promote engagement in international organizations. It's, as I said, it's a kitchen table issue that matters to Americans.
Yeah, and Senators, we look ahead to this week as we set the table for this week in New York, Climate Week and the UN General Assembly Week, which will make headlines around the world. The New York Times on Sunday, their lead headline in the early edition that you get in New Hampshire, with U.S. in retreat, autocrats are seizing initiative at the UN.
Well, that's right. It goes to what I was saying earlier about China. As we've retreated, China has promoted additional personnel at the UN. The number of civilian personnel we have at the UN has declined to about half of what it was at the start of this year. And China's increased their level of professional staff dramatically in the hundreds.
So this is, you were talking about kitchen table, also very practical from a national security perspective.
Absolutely.
You're worried.
And because, again, it's in our interest if we're there when we're setting standards for cybersecurity, when we're looking at standards around trade, when we're looking at the myriad of rules and regulations that get set by international bodies. And if the United States isn't a player, then we're not going to have anything to say about what those rules and regulations are and how they affect Americans.
Senator, I'm about to get the hook, so I can make this our final stop on our tour of the world. But this is a great case study that excited me. You are known for your bipartisan approach to foreign policy. And I was very interested to learn that you've been making the case about Voice of America, USAID, and you've tried to do it in a way that resonates with your Republican colleagues. Tell us how you did that.
Well, for one of the things that I think we spend way too little time on is the information space. I think as big a threat as military conflict is, it's the information, the disinformation, the misinformation that is getting shared. And all we have to do is to look at the upcoming elections in Moldova to see what the impact of that can be. And yet what we've done is to totally dismantle all of the areas in which we can make a difference, whether it's the Global Engagement Center at the Department of State, Voice of America, Radio Free Asia, all of the entities that allowed us to provide a counter-narrative to give the facts to people around the world are being dismantled by this administration, and there's nothing to replace it. And so who's moving in? China's moving in. They're taking over. They're
A generational opening for them.
absolutely. And if we don't think about how to address it, then we're going to get left behind.
I've had a lot of good times in the Granite State. A pioneering Senator, Jeanne Shaheen, thank you for this amazing tour of the world.
Thank you. Come visit us in New Hampshire.